The studio lights blazed down on the stage, cameras rolling, audience buzzing with energy. It was supposed to be just another lively morning show, laws, debates, a few jokes tossed around casually. But no one in that building knew that the next few minutes would become one of the most unforgettable moments in live television history. The crowd clapped as the host announced the next guest. The doors opened, and Jonathan Roumie walked out with that familiar calmness, steady steps, soft smile, and a presence that instantly greeted the room. He greeted the audience gently, waving with humility rather than celebrity pride. But at the far side of the table, Joy Behar leaned back in her chair with a smirk foaming on her face. She whispered something to the co-host beside her, and they both chuckled. Jonathan continued smiling, unaware of the storm that was waiting for him. He took his seat. The cameras zoomed in. The audience settled. Then Joy struck. Well, she said loudly, raising an eyebrow. Look who's here, the man who plays Jesus. Should we all behave ourselves? Her tone was sharp, mocking, wrapped in fake playfulness. The audience gave a nervous law, unsure whether to follow her lead. Jonathan's smile didn't fade, but something in his eyes changed, like a calm sea suddenly meeting a storm. He didn't respond immediately. He simply folded his hands on the table, letting her words hang in the air. Joy continued, Tell me, Jonathan, do you always stay in character? Or do you take off the halo when the camera stops? More laughter. Louder this time. She is pushing the moment further, expecting Jonathan to joke back, blush, or get rattled. But he did none of those things. Instead, he took a slow breath, looked directly at her, not with anger, not with embarrassment, but with a steady, peaceful gaze only a man with deep conviction could hold. What happened next didn't just silence the laughter, it froze the entire studio. Even the cameraman stood still, sensing something unforgettable was about to unfold. Jonathan leaned forward ever so slightly, and with a voice soft enough to calm a storm, he said words that would replay across the internet for weeks. And Joy Behar, the queen of kick comebacks, was suddenly out of words. The silence lingering after Jonathan's calm response in part created a strange tension in the studio, the kind that makes even a crowded room feel small. But the show had only just begun, and no one knew how deeply the next moments would shake the people watching, both in the studio and across millions of screens. The morning show had been planned like any other. A few political discussions, a celebrity interview, a comedy segment, and some light arguments to keep viewers entertained. Joy Behar thrived in this environment. She was sharp, loud, witty, and unafraid to poke fun at anyone, especially people who carried their beliefs openly. To her, it was all entertainment. To the producers, it was ratings. But this time, something was different. Backstage, before the cameras turned on, a few crew members whispered to each other. Jonathan Roumie's coming today. Isn't he the guy from The Chosen? Yeah. Apparently the audience loves him. He's such a calm guy. I wonder how he'll deal with Joy. Even they sensed a storm approaching. When Jonathan walked onto the stage moments earlier, the entire atmosphere shifted. Some celebrities entered a room and demanded attention. Jonathan entered and earned it. His presence wasn't loud. It was steady, grounded, and strangely comforting. The audience could feel it. Some even sat up straighter, as if in respect. But Joy Behar wasn't moved. She saw his calmness as a challenge, something to break, something to test. She leaned toward the microphone, ready to entertain her viewers with sarcasm. As Jonathan settled into his seat, Joy shuffled her cards dramatically in her hands. So, Jonathan, she said, drawing out his name with exaggerated annoyance, you're the man everyone says is the nicest guy in Hollywood. The audience chuckled, unsure if it was a compliment or a setup. Jonathan simply nodded politely. I try to be kind, yes. Joy laughed loudly. Try. Oh, come on, playing Jesus must make it easy, right? Or does the role get to your head sometimes? Jonathan's expression didn't change. He didn't look offended. He didn't look bothered. He just looked patient. Across the table, one of the co-hosts shifted awkwardly. This wasn't the light teasing they expected. Joy's tone carried something sharper underneath. But Joy continued anyway. You know, she said, tapping her pen on the desk. A lot of actors play roles and then move on, but you, people treat you like you're the real thing. Jonathan tilted his head thoughtfully. I think people are responding to the message more than the messenger. A message. Or a fantasy. Joy shot back. The audience wins. Some laughed nervously. Others leaned forward, sensing the tension building. Jonathan didn't respond immediately. He let the question float in the air before answering gently. Faith isn't a fantasy for everyone, Joy. For some, it's the thing that gets them through their darkest nights. The studio shifted again. Even the producers watching behind the cameras exchanged glances. Something about Jonathan's voice, soft yet unshakably firm, cut through the noise. Joy crossed her arms, leaning back in her chair. Well, maybe some people need fantasy to cope. But I prefer reality. Jonathan nodded slowly. Reality without compassion becomes cruelty. Reality without respect becomes chaos. Joy's smile faltered. Just for a second. Jonathan continued, his voice steady. Mocking someone's belief may feel like boldness. But sometimes it reveals something deeper. A discomfort with what that belief represents. The room went silent. A cameraman later said he had never seen Joy Behar blink so slowly, as if processing a truth she wasn't ready to hear. But Jonathan wasn't lecturing. He wasn't attacking. He was simply speaking from a place of sincerity. Joy tried to break the tension with humor. Oh, are you fictionalizing me now? Jonathan smiled kindly. Not at all. I'm just saying, respect is free to give. And its impact lasts longer than any joke. The co-host sitting beside Jonathan cleared his throat. Well, he said awkwardly, that's definitely something to think about. The audience murmured. Some nodded. Others stayed frozen. They weren't watching entertainment anymore. They were watching a real moment unfold. Joy shifted in her seat, visibly unsettled. Her script, her RAYTM, her control of the conversation. Jonathan had quietly dismantled all of it without raising his voice, without insulting her, without even trying to win. He simply stood on truth and humility, and somehow, it made him unshakable. The producer's voice crackled through Joy's earpiece. We need to soften this. Change direction. Move to a safer question. She cleared her throat and forced a small laugh. All right, Jonathan, let's talk about your new season. I'm sure it's uplifting. But her tone wasn't playful this time. Something in her posture had changed. She seemed smaller, unsure, almost reflective. Jonathan answered her questions politely, but everyone could tell the atmosphere was different now. For the first time in years, Joy Behar was no longer leading the conversation. Jonathan Roumie was. And none of them knew that the most shocking moment was still ahead. Although the conversation had shifted to safer topics, the air in the studio still felt heavy, like a glass ready to crack with the slightest pressure. Jonathan answered Joy's questions calmly, but every viewer could sense that something unspoken still lingered between them. Joy Behar wasn't used to losing control of a conversation, and the embarrassment simmering under her smile was impossible to hide. During a brief commercial break, she leaned toward one of the co-hosts, whispering through clenched teeth, I'm not letting him preach to me on my own show. The co-host swallowed nervously. Joy, maybe just let this segment finish peacefully. But Joy wasn't listening. She is preparing a comeback, a sharp, cutting one, and anyone who knew her could see it building like a storm behind her eyes. The cameras went live again. All right, Joy said, tapping her papers loudly. Let's get real for a moment. Jonathan, you seem like a nice guy, truly. But I have to ask, don't you think people take you too seriously? I mean, you're an actor. You play Jesus. But some people out there treat you like a prophet. The tone was sharper this time. More direct. The audience shifted, sensing she was poking the bear again. Jonathan leaned back gently in his chair. I am grateful that people connect with the character. Joy didn't let him finish. Yeah, but isn't that kind of dangerous? When people put actors on pedestals. Especially actors who play religious figures. Her voice carried the weight of something personal. Something deeper than simple teasing. Jonathan looked at her with a calm curiosity. Why does it bother you so much? That question hit harder than anything he had said before. Joy straightened up, caught off guard. It doesn't bother me, she snapped. I just think people shouldn't confuse fiction with reality. Jonathan nodded slowly. I agree. But faith isn't fiction, Joy. Not for millions of people watching right now. And certainly not for the hearts that find hope in something greater than themselves. Joy scoffed. Hope. Sure. But some people use faith to judge others. To control. To shame. Jonathan's expression softened. And some use humor to do the same. The audience gasped quietly. Even the co-hosts froze. Joy's jaw tightened. Humor is my job. Respect can be part of your job too. Jonathan replied gently. You're a powerful woman with a huge audience. Your words shake how people think. Imagine if the same humor was used to lift people instead of hurt them. Joy's eyes flashed, hurt, anger, maybe fear. Are you accusing me of hurting people? I'm asking you to consider the impact, Jonathan said. Because whether you believe in faith or not, people's beliefs matter. Their hairs matter. And mocking what they hold sacred, that can cut deeper than you realize. The studio was silent again. No one dared to move. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. Joy forced a law, but it came out brittle. So now you're the moral police. Jonathan shook his head.
No.
I'm simply someone who believes kindness should be louder than mockery. Joy leaned forward, eyes narrowing. And what if I don't care about that? What if I want to question everything? Isn't that my right? Absolutely, Jonathan said softly. You have every right to question. But questioning is different from belittling. One opens conversation. The other closes hearts. For a split second, something in Joy's expression cracked. Something small, almost invisible, but undeniably human. A flicker of vulnerability beneath the armor she wore. The audience caught it, the cameras caught it, Jonathan caught it most of all. He didn't attack. He didn't push. He simply continued, his voice a gentle anchor. Joy, I don't think you mock faith because you hate it. I think you mock it because somewhere along the way, someone used faith to hurt you. The room froze. Even Joy's hands, always expressive, went still. Her face lost its defensive smirk, replaced by tension no joke could hide. How dare you, she began, but her voice cracked before the sentence could finish. Jonathan didn't interrupt. He waited. Joy tried again. You don't know anything about my life. Jonathan nodded. You're right. I don't. But pain speaks a universal language. And I hear it in your voice. A few audience members shifted, uncomfortable. Others had tears forming in their eyes. The co-host stared at Joy, unsure whether to step in or stay silent. Joy looked away, blinking fast. For the first time, the woman known for her sharp tongue seemed wounded. Jonathan leaned slightly closer, his tone filled with empathy. I'm not judging you. I'm simply saying, faith isn't the enemy. People's mistakes are. And you don't have to carry the hurt they caused. Joy swallowed hard. Why are you saying this? Because you matter, Jonathan whispered. Even if you pretend you don't care. Joy sat there frozen, exposed, uncertain, shaken. And the audience knew. Everything from this moment forward would change. The studio felt colder than before, almost unnaturally still. Joy Behar, usually unshakable and overflowing with sharp wit, sat silent. Her composure had cracked in front of millions, and for the first time, she didn't know how to gather the pieces. A producer's voice whispered urgently in her earpiece. Joy, smile. Say something. We're live. But Joy couldn't. Not this time. The armor she had worn for years, the jokes, the sarcasm, the quick comebacks, none of it could protect her from the weight of Jonathan's words. Across the disc, Jonathan didn't move. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. His stillness was almost disarming. He simply waited, hands folded, as if holding space for her to breathe. One of the co-hosts tried to break the tension. Well, that was a very emotional exchange. But even his voice shook. Everyone in the studio knew they had just witnessed something rare, something real. The audience sat in dead silence. Some leaned forward. Others covered their mouths. A few had tears in their eyes. They weren't just watching a show anymore. They were watching a human being stripped down to truth. Joy finally inhaled, shaky and shallow. She looked at the table, not at Jonathan. Why did you say that? She whispered, more to herself than to him. Jonathan's voice remained calm. Because sometimes the truth we run from is the truth we need most. Her eyes flickered upward, meeting his. You think you know me? No, Jonathan said. I don't need to know your story to recognize pain. Pain has a way of speaking even when we don't. The audience exhaled collectively, like everyone had been holding their breath at once. Joy clenched her jaw, trying to restrain the emotion building in her throat. I'm not hurt. I'm just logical. I question things. I challenge them. There's nothing wrong with questioning, Jonathan replied softly. But mocking isn't questioning. It's shielding. Joy looked startled by that word. Shielding. Jonathan nodded. People lie when they want to hide. People attack when they don't want to be attacked. People mock when they're afraid of being vulnerable. Joy blinked, fighting back something she didn't want to show. Something raw. Behind the cameras, the queue exchanged stunned looks. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a confrontation with truth. And truth wasn't losing. Jonathan leaned forward, his eyes gentle. Joy, you're not cruel. You're guarded. There's a difference. A tear escaped a corner of her eye before she could stop it. She quickly wiped it with the back of her hand, pretending nothing happened. One co-host reached out as if to comfort her, but she waved them off. She didn't want pity. She wanted control. But control had slipped through her fingers the moment Jonathan spoke the words she didn't want to hear. She cleared her throat, trying to steady her voice. I make jokes. That's all. I don't mean to hurt anyone. Jonathan smiled, not triumphantly, but kindly. I believe you. Humor is a gift. But even gifts can be used as weapons without meaning to. Joy took another shaky breath. You're saying I'm hurting people. Jonathan shook his head gently. I'm saying you might be hurting yourself. That sentence hit her harder than anything before. Her shoulders slumped. Her gaze softened. The mask she'd worn so confidently for years fell to the floor. Peace by peace. The studio audience watched in silence. There was no laughter, no discomfort, only a strange, collective empathy. People who once tuned in for entertainment now felt like they were witnessing someone hell in real time. Joy swallowed hard. I don't, her voice cracked again. I don't do well with this. This? Jonathan asked gently. Being seen, she whispered. Jonathan nodded slowly. Then consider this a moment of grace. Everyone deserves to be seen, not for their mistakes, not for their mask, but for their heart. Joy covered her mouth, tears slipping out despite her efforts to hold them back. A few audience members quietly cried with her. The co-hosts sat motionless, recognizing that something sacred was happening on their stage, something more profound than any planned segment. Jonathan spoke again, softly. Joy, whatever hurt you've carried, you don't have to carry it alone. And you don't have to cover it with laughter. Joy shook her head. You don't understand, people expect me to be strong. To be bold. Strength isn't the absence of vulnerability, Jonathan said. It's the courage to let it show. Joy broke. A quiet sob escaped her lips, not loud, not dramatic, just real. And somehow, that made it more powerful. Jonathan didn't reach out physically, he didn't need to. His presence alone felt like a hand offered in peace. For the first time in her career, Joy Behar wasn't the one shaping the narrative. She wasn't the one controlling the conversation. She was the one being understood. And the entire studio knew this moment was bigger than any interview. Bigger than ratings. Bigger than conflict. This was a moment of awakening. The studio had never felt so still. The audience remained silent, suspended between breath and disbelief, as Joy Behar's usual boldness melted into a fragile, trembling honesty. And right at the center of it all was Jonathan, calm, grounded, unshaken, almost impossibly gentle. But what no one knew, what not a single person in the studio had yet realized, was that the most shocking moment of the entire broadcast was only seconds away. A producer behind the cameras frantically waved to get Joy's attention, but she couldn't hear the cue through the pounding in her chest. Another crew member pointed to the teleprompter, but her eyes were blurred with emotion. The show was slipping off script fast, and there was nothing anyone could do to pull it back. Jonathan, sensing her quiet unraveling, softened his voice even more. Joy, the world sees your strength. But real strength isn't in how loud you speak. It's in how deeply you feel. Joy looked at him with a mixture of confusion and vulnerability. Why do you care? Why are you even trying to help me? Jonathan smiled gently. Because we all human. And humans heal when someone finally listens. Before Joy could respond, the studio doors opened. Everyone turned. A tall man in a headset rushed in, carrying a folder. An assistant followed behind him, breathless. They looked nervous, as if something urgent was unfolding backstage. The audience whispered. The co-hosts looked confused. Joy wiped her eyes quickly, trying to compose herself before anyone noticed. Jonathan, the man in the headset said, slightly out of breath. We need you backstage for a moment. Joy's brows furrowed. What? Why? Jonathan looked puzzled too. Is something wrong? The assistant handed him a file. Thick, official, embossed with a seal that caught the studio lights. The audience leaned in, trying to see. Joy stared at the folder, her curiosity drowning out her lingering emotions. This arrived just now, the assistant explained. It's urgent. Jonathan glanced at the cover, then at Joy. He hesitated, almost as if he didn't want to leave her in the middle of such a raw moment. But the man insisted. Please, it's important. Jonathan stood slowly. The cameras followed him instinctively. The whole studio held its breath. He opened the file. As his eyes moved across the first page, the entire room watched every tiny shift in his expression. Confusion. Recognition. And then, a warmth that spread across his face like dawn breaking after a storm. Joy leaned forward. What is it? Jonathan exhaled softly, then held up the letter. It's from the network, he said. One co-host blinked. The network. As in. Jonathan nodded. The executives. They've been following the show. This conversation. This moment. The audience erupted into whispers. Joy's heart raced. They wanted to deliver this personally. Jonathan continued, lifting the final page. Because they couldn't wait. Joy stood now too, stunned. Tell us, she said. What does it say? Jonathan looked at her, not with pride, not with triumph, but with genuine warmth. They want me to become a permanent guest mentor on this program. The audience gasped. Joy's jaw dropped. What? Jonathan smiled humbly. A guest mentor. Someone who comes on regularly to talk about empathy, faith, compassion, bridging divides. One of the co-hosts clapped before catching themselves. The others exchanged wide-eyed looks. Joy swallowed hard. So, you mean you're joining the show? Jonathan nodded. If I accept. The audience cheered, louder than ever. Some stood. Others cried. The energy surged through the room like electricity. But Joy wasn't cheering. She was staring at Jonathan. Stunned, not because he was joining the show, but because she suddenly understood the deeper meaning behind everything he had said to her. This wasn't a debate. This wasn't a clash of personalities. This was someone offering her something she never expected in her world of sharp lines and sharper words. A chance at healing. Joy stepped closer. Jonathan. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything right now. Jonathan replied softly. Just know this. I didn't come here to challenge you. I came here to understand you. Her voice cracked. And I mocked you. And I forgive you, he said gently. Joy's eyes glistened again, but this time, her tears weren't from hurt. They were from relief. The audience watched, breathless, as Joy whispered. Maybe I needed someone like you on this show. Jonathan nodded. Maybe we all need someone who listens. The cameras zoomed in. Joy reached out her hand, hesitant, trembling, sincere. Jonathan took it. The audience erupted again, this time in a standing ovation that shook the studio. No one, not Joy, not the hosts, not the viewers at home, would ever forget this moment. Because it wasn't just a reveal. It was a transformation. The applause thundered through the studio like a wave, rolling from one end of the room to the other. People were on their feet, clapping, cheering, crying. Even those who had come expecting a typical morning show debate now stood witnessing something rare. Two human beings meeting honestly, without ego, without performance. Joy Behar, someone known for sharp humor, strong opinions, and an almost impenetrable wall, stood holding Jonathan Roumie's hand as if gasping something she'd been searching for without realizing it. When the applause finally softened, Joy drew a shaky breath and let go of his hand slowly. She wiped her eyes, but didn't bother pretending anymore. Vulnerability didn't scare her in this moment, not the way it usually did. Jonathan, she said quietly, her voice still trembling, I owe you more than an apology. Jonathan shook his head gently. You owe me nothing. You were honest. And honesty, even when it comes out raw, is better than hiding. Joy let out a soft, broken law. Well, I've never been good at hiding. At least not intentionally. The audience chuckled along with her, but this time their laughter wasn't mocking or nervous, it was warm. Supportive. Compassionate. Jonathan returned to his seat, signaling for Joy to sit too. She hesitated, then followed, settling into her chair like someone who had just finished climbing a long emotional mountain. A co-host, still stunned, leaned forward. Joy, this is the most open we've ever seen you. Joy inhaled deeply. That's because I've spent years playing Tao. It's easier to make jokes than to let people see what's real. She looked at Jonathan, eyes shimmering. But he didn't mock me back. He met me with kindness. And that does something to you. Jonathan's smile was soft. Kindness has a way of clearing the fog we didn't even know we were living in. The audience applauded gently again. Joy turned back to him. I've always carried certain things from my past. Anger, disappointment, distrust. And I guess I used humor to push people away. Jonathan nodded. Humor can be a shield. But sometimes humility becomes the doorway. Joy sighed, a long, honest release of emotion. You didn't just answer me today. You saw me. And you allowed yourself to be seen, Jonathan said. That takes far more courage than most people realize. The studio lights softened, casting a calmer glow over the set, almost as if the very atmosphere was adjusting itself to match the moment. A producer's voice chimed in through the host's earpieces. Let the segment continue. Don't go. This is too important. And for once, Joy didn't argue with the control booth. She straightened a little. Jonathan, if you do accept that role as a guest mentor on the show, I want you to know something. Jonathan looked at her attentively. What's that? Joy's voice was gentler than anyone had ever heard it. I want to learn. I want to grow. And I want to do better, not because the network wants it, not because viewers demand it, but because I think I'm tired of carrying old battles. Jonathan's expression glowed with warmth. Then this is already a step forward. Growth never comes from perfection. It comes from willingness. Joy blinked, absorbing every word. One of the co-hosts finally spoke, tears in their eyes. Jonathan, your presence today didn't just change the tone of this show. You changed us. All of us. Jonathan looked around, at the hosts, the crew, the audience. I didn't change you. I reminded you of what was already inside you. Joy swallowed hard. You know, I always believed vulnerability made you weak. But today, it feels like the opposite. Jonathan smiled softly. Vulnerability is strength. Only the brave allow themselves to be human. A hush fell again, not uncomfortable, but reverent. Joy placed a hand over her heart. Thank you, Jonathan. For today, and for seeing beyond the persona I've built. Jonathan shook his head. Thank yourself, Joy. I only held up the mirror. You chose to look into it. The audience rose into another standing ovation. This one not for drama or tension, but for healing. For humanity. Joy stood too, this time not shaken, but steady. Jonathan turned toward her with a gentle nod. She returned it without hesitation. This wasn't just a resolution. It was the beginning of a transformation. One no scriptwriter or producer could have planned. And as the studio lights dimmed slightly for the commercial break, Joy whispered to Jonathan, tears finally drying. You didn't defeat me today, you freed me. Jonathan smiled. That was always the point. The cameras were still rolling, but the atmosphere had shifted from the familiar electricity of live television to something gentler, almost sacred. When the director announced they were going to break in 60 seconds, no one moved to their usual positions. No shuffling of cards. No quick fights of makeup. No forced on-camera greens. Everyone, hosts, crew, audience, remained locked in the lingering warmth of what had just happened. Jonathan sat quietly, hands loosely folded, calm as ever. Joy's shoulders had finally settled, no longer wrapped in their usual defensive tension. Something had melted. Something had been released. And for the first time in a long time, she looked peaceful. The floor manager held up 5 fingers. 5 seconds till they were live again. Joy inhaled slowly, lifted her gaze to the camera, then to Jonathan. The red light blinked on. We're back, she said, her voice steady, softer, and unmistakably different. And I think it's fair to say today hasn't been an ordinary show. The audience chuckled knowingly. Joy continued. We came in expecting to discuss a project Jonathan is working on, and we did. But what happened here today turned into something deeper. Something we didn't plan. Something I definitely didn't expect. She turned to him. Jonathan, before we wrap up, I want to ask you something, not as a host, not as a critic, not as someone famous for saying things she shouldn't. Jonathan grinned playfully. Your reputation precedes you. The audience erupted with laughter, but this time it was warm, not mocking. Joy exhaled a law as well. I know. But I mean this seriously. She leaned closer. For people watching right now, people who are angry at someone, or hurting, or hiding behind walls they don't know how to take down, what would you tell them? Jonathan grew still. His expression softened with the kind of sincerity that didn't need dramatics to be powerful. I'd tell them this, he began. Pain is not a failing. Fear is not a flaw. And armor isn't a sign of strength, it's a sign of survival. Joy's eyes glistened again. He continued, when we attack others, it's often because some part of us is wounded and trying to protect itself. But true healing doesn't come from fighting harder. It comes from allowing ourselves to be seen, and allowing others to see themselves in us. He glanced at the camera directly. And forgiveness, whether giving it or receiving it, isn't about declaring someone right. It's about letting go so you can move forward. The room was silent. Even producers in the control booth had stopped talking. Jonathan looked back at Joy. You allowed yourself to be honest today. And honesty is the beginning of transformation. Joy swallowed, visibly moved. You make it sound simple. No, he said softly. I make it sound possible. The audience exhaled collectively, as if taking in words their hearts had needed long before this moment. Joy turned to her fellow hosts. Any last thoughts? One host spoke up, voice thick with emotion. I think we all learned something today. That you can disagree without dehumanizing. That empathy isn't weakness. And that sometimes the person we challenge the hardest is the one reminding us of who we're trying to become. Another added, "Today didn't feel like a debate. It felt like healing in real time." Joy nodded and looked back at Jonathan. "You came in here humble, calm, and open-hearted. You didn't push, didn't preach, didn't defend yourself. You just spoke from the center of your being." Her voice wavered. "And you made me realize I've been living from the edges. From fear. From reflex. From old anger that has nothing to do with the people I talk to." Jonathan's expression was soft, full of quiet understanding. "We all carry old battles. The real courage is in choosing not to keep fighting them." Joy took in a slow breath. "I'd like to start choosing differently." Jonathan nodded. Then today wasn't an argument. It was an awakening. A gentle murmur echoed through the audience. The director signaled they were almost out of time. Joy faced the camera one last time. "To our viewers, whatever you're going through, whatever past you're carrying, whatever walls you've built, maybe today reminds us we don't have to keep living behind them." She looked at Jonathan again, gratitude shining openly. "Thank you. For everything." Jonathan smiled. "Thank you for letting yourself be real." The outro music began to play softly, not triumphant, but hopeful, like the closing notes of a story that had finally found its heart. As the credits started rolling, Joy reached across the table, took Jonathan's hand, not for the camera, not for the audience, but for herself. And he held it, steady and genuine. The final shot faded out on two people, once divided, now connected through humility, honesty, and the courageous willingness to be human. A moment of television that had quietly become a moment of transformation.